You are probably a little bored right now, or you were 10 minutes ago, or you will be later tonight when the day slows down and there is nothing left to fill the silence. Boredom feels like one of the oldest human experiences, something we all know, something we all fight against without even thinking about it. But when you actually look at where boredom comes from, when you trace the feeling back through history, something very strange happens. It disappears. Ancient humans, as far as we can tell, almost never felt bored the way you feel bored. Not because they were happier, not because their lives were more meaningful, but because the thing you are feeling right now is, in a specific and precise way, brand new on this planet. The word boredom did not exist in English until 1852. That is the year Charles Dickens used it, for what most linguists consider the first time, in a novel called Bleak House. Before that, English did not really have a word for this specific feeling. People had words for sadness, tiredness, dissatisfaction, but not for this. Not for the particular flavor of empty restlessness that you know so well. Other languages had similar late arrivals. The German word Langeweile, which literally translates to long while, only entered common usage in the 18th century. The French ennui shifted into its modern meaning around the same time. Ancient Greek had a distant relative in acedia, but that word meant spiritual despair, not the drift you feel when you have nothing to do on a Sunday afternoon. This is not just a linguistic accident. When cultures do not have a word for something, it usually means the thing itself was not common, or did not exist, or was too rare to bother naming. Something changed in the last few centuries that made this feeling common enough to require a word. And once we had the word, we could not stop noticing it everywhere. To understand what we are actually talking about, we need to split boredom into two categories. The first is what psychologists call situational boredom. You are stuck in traffic. You are waiting for a bus. You are sitting through a lecture that is not interesting. Your mind is trying to leave the situation. That kind of boredom is probably universal. Ancient humans felt it too. Waiting out a rainstorm inside a cave, watching for game that would not appear, sitting with a sick child through a long night. But the second kind is what philosophers call existential boredom. This is the deeper one, the feeling that time itself is empty, that life has no texture, that something is missing but you cannot name what. The Danish philosopher Kierkegaard, writing in the 1800s, said that boredom was the root of all evil. He believed that people who could not sit with their own emptiness would do almost anything to escape it. Start wars, chase pleasure, destroy themselves, just to feel something instead of nothing. A century later, the German philosopher Heidegger wrote entire lectures about what he called profound boredom. He argued that if you could sit inside it without running, it would show you the actual shape of your life. Most people, he said, will never do this. It is too painful. Existential boredom is very, very new, and it is the one that is quietly ruining modern life. To see what changed, you have to look at how ancient humans actually spent their time. In 1972, an anthropologist named Marshall Salins published a book that shook the field. It was called The Original Affluent Society. In it, Salins argued that hunter-gatherer people were not the poor, desperate, constantly struggling ancestors we imagined them to be. They worked about 20 hours a week to feed themselves, sometimes less. Modern studies of the Hadza in Tanzania, one of the last hunter-gatherer societies alive today, confirm the pattern. They spend roughly 6 hours a day on subsistence tasks. The rest of the time, they are doing something else. The question is, what? Because they were not scrolling. They were not sitting alone in an apartment, and they were not, as far as anyone can tell, bored. They were, first of all, almost never alone. Hunter-gatherer bands lived in groups of 30 to 50 people. Everyone slept close to everyone else. Everyone ate together. Everyone could see everyone else at almost every moment of the day. They talked constantly. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers report that conversation is the primary activity of most non-work hours. Not deep philosophical conversation, just talk, gossip, jokes, stories about who did what and why. They sang, often for hours at a time. Group singing was as common as speaking. Sometimes it accompanied work. Sometimes it filled the evening after dinner. Sometimes it was the whole event. They made things, almost constantly. Even in moments of rest, hands were busy, weaving, carving, repairing tools, braiding rope, sharpening blades. The idle hand was rare. They watched their children, not the way modern parents watch children, half distracted, half present. They watched them fully. For hours, children were the entertainment. Their play was the theater. And they slept. A lot. Modern hunter-gatherer studies show that they spend far more time in rest than modern office workers. Napping in the afternoon, lying by the fire, dozing off in each other's company. None of that is boredom. That is a full life, quietly happening. But the real difference is something we have almost completely lost. Ancient humans had rich interior worlds. Because they had no writing, everything they knew, they carried in their heads. Songs that lasted hours, genealogies going back generations, stories with hundreds of characters, mental maps of vast territories, updated constantly. When they sat by a fire and stared into the flames, they were not empty. They were full of stories they had heard 1,000 times, full of songs still forming, full of memories, images, faces, dreams. Sitting in silence, for them, was not sitting with nothing. It was sitting with everything they had ever heard, ever seen, ever survived. Modern humans have outsourced almost all of that. We have books. We have phones. We have Google. We have infinite external stimulation. And our internal worlds, on average, have shrunk to fit the space around them. So when we sit in silence now, we sit with less. And we call the emptiness we feel boredom. Some early cultures understood this so well that they built entire protections around it. The Jewish Sabbath is a full day of forced stillness. No work, no labor, no creation. Just presence, prayer, food, and family. Ancient societies around the world had similar practices. Days of enforced idleness. Rituals that emptied out the schedule. They understood that if you did not deliberately protect quiet time, it would be eaten by something else. They were preserving the exact resource that modernity has now almost completely consumed. The transition happened slowly, and then all at once. The agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago created a new kind of time, waiting for crops to grow, waiting for the seasons to turn, waiting for the harvest. But agricultural societies filled that waiting with festivals, rituals, work cycles, and dense community life. There were still very few private hours. Boredom did not have room to grow. The real change came with the Industrial Revolution. Factories needed workers to sit still in one place, doing one repetitive task for 12 or 14 hours. Time became something to endure. The clock became something to watch. At the same time, cities were forming. People were moving into apartments, living alone, eating alone. spending long stretches of the day without another human voice near them. For the first time in human history, huge numbers of people were experiencing hours of solitude with no assigned task, no group ritual, no interior story to fill the space. And they invented a word for it. Today, the average person checks their phone somewhere between 58 and 96 times a day. That is once every 10 to 15 minutes of waking life. The reason is not that we love our phones. It is that we cannot sit in the space between them. We have become so unpracticed at silence that any moment of quiet triggers a small involuntary panic. A hand reaches for something, anything, a screen, a snack, a tab, a door, and every app on that screen is designed specifically and deliberately to make the panic disappear. Notifications, infinite feeds, autoplay videos. Every one of them exists to fill the exact gap where ancient humans used to sit with themselves. The systems know what they are doing. They target the small, quiet moments, waiting rooms, elevators, the 3 seconds between one task and the next. All of them now are filled. Children now, born into this environment, seem to lose the ability to be still very early. Educators talk about the difficulty of getting a modern 8-year-old to sit quietly for 5 minutes without stimulation. This is not because children have changed, it is because the environment has. The interesting thing is that some of the greatest ideas in human history came from long, protected periods of boredom. Isaac Newton figured out gravity during a plague year when he was stuck alone at his family farm with nothing to do. Einstein worked out relativity while sitting bored in a Swiss patent office. Boredom in a full mind is not empty. It is fertile. But now, that fertile emptiness is almost impossible to find. There is a small, growing industry of retreats where people pay thousands of dollars to sit in silence for a week and not touch their phone. What they are really paying for is something their ancestors had for free, every single day. Which brings us back to the ancient human sitting by the fire. They were probably not thinking about anything important. Not solving a problem, not planning tomorrow, just watching the flames, listening to the low sound of the others breathing, remembering a song from earlier in the day. They were not entertained. They were not bored. They were just there. And that state, that quiet, awake, unstimulated presence, is something almost no modern person experiences anymore. Not because we are worse, not because we are weaker, but because we have covered every moment of our lives with something else, something faster, something louder, something that feels like living but is actually a way of avoiding it. So when you feel bored, you might not be feeling something ancient and human. You might be feeling something new, a gap that used to be full without anyone noticing. A silence that used to be a companion, not a threat. Ancient humans probably had short moments of restlessness, long walks with nothing to look at, nights when a story was already told. But they did not, as far as we can tell, have the empty ache we now call boredom, because the space where the ache would go was already occupied. Somewhere in your body is the DNA of an ancient human who could sit for hours doing nothing and feel absolutely fine about it. That capacity is still in you, buried under 14 apps and 3 streaming subscriptions and the low-grade panic of 1,000 notifications. Maybe boredom is not the problem to solve. Maybe boredom is just the doorway, the gap where something older used to live, and still could if we ever gave it a chance to come back. If this made you think, hit like. And if you want more small, strange questions about being a human, subscribe. And if you are bored right now, maybe just sit in it for a while. See what shows up.